Tonight on Bridge City News, hundreds of thousands marched in cities across Canada yesterday in support of the pro-life movement. It seems that city councillors in Medicine Hat have a real problem with Quebec. We will explain why. And federal opposition parties are calling for an inquiry into the Mark Norman case. We have the details.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Over 100,000 men and women of all ages marched across Canada, including the streets of Ottawa, funneling to the steps of Parliament Hill for the 22nd annual March for Life yesterday. A well-known pro-life activist weighs in on why life begins at conception.
The West is where you have the most medical advancements. We are seeing all kinds of beautiful things in the area of fetology, where doctors are even going as far as doing surgeries on babies that are still growing and gestating in the womb. How is it that in the same countries where these cutting-edge medical science is being advanced, that in these same countries, they are still, on the other hand, devising ways of killing babies of the same age, gestating babies at the same time? So how is it? And that's why I've been speaking out, and that's the point of view that I come from. What is happening right now is kind of a legal, silent genocide. It's legal because, a lot of politicians are saying it's okay, it's a woman's right. People in the abortion industry keep developing new ways to abort babies. People in the academic world doing everything possible to minimize what abortion is, and those who are in medical field are hiding medical facts just so that abortion can be okay. There's all these things that you then have to make space for in a society where a big lie like this has been told. So if you tell one lie and say it should be legal to kill this human being, then everything around that will change.
Iki Ocha says it is a shame that in our day and age, we still have to stand up for human rights. Now, do you have a kit packed with everything you need for up to 72 hours in the event of an emergency? The City of Lethbridge hosted DisasterCon today at Park Place Mall. As Loris Alexander explains, the event brought 11 local agencies together to talk about what to expect in an emergency situation.
The City of Lethbridge is encouraging residents to be prepared and have a family emergency plan and emergency kits in case of, emergencies. Members from each agency were on hand to educate the community about what to expect in an emergency.
Emergency Preparedness Week is something that happens every year. The first full week of May is dedicated to this cause, so this year it lands on May 5th to 11th. And part of that is really encouraging personal preparedness with our residents. So we're trying to get out in the community, show them how you can build an emergency kit, know the risks in our community, so what are we actually susceptible to, and ultimately create a household plan. So if you're all at work or if you're at school, where's a common meeting place, who are your contacts, and what are you taking with you if you need to leave very quickly?
Often in an emergency situation, if pets are left at home or whatever, they obviously need to go as well. Most of the time during an emergency, it's either going to be like an evacuation or a shelter in place. So we're suggesting that people create a 72-hour kit for their animals as well. That'll include both supplies if you have to stay at home for a long period of time or if you have to get out and go real quick.
Palmer says with the rise in emergency-related events in the country, it's critical to ensure the community knows what to do should a situation arise. For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
The unemployment rate in our region has gone up. According to Stats Canada, the Lethbridge and Medicine Hat unemployment rate went from 6.1 to 6.4%. In April, the rate was just 6%. Looking across the province, the highest unemployment rate is in the Camrose-Drumheller region at 9.3%. In Calgary, the rate went from 7.9 to 7.5%. Edmonton also decreased from 7.3 to 7%. Red Deer increased from 5.3 to 6.5%. North, in the Grand Prairie Peace River region, the unemployment rate increased a full percentage point to 5.4%. Across Canada, the jobless rate was 5.7%. That was down from 5.8% in March. 4 LCI alumni will be added to the Wall of Distinction for showing exceptional academic performance during their time at school. Those same individuals were honored this afternoon at the Distinguished Achievement Awards induction. Ainsley O'Reilly caught up with the now adults who were thrilled to share their stories.
From criminal lawyers to Hollywood actors and actresses, the LCI Wall of Distinction highlights former students who have gone on to achieve greatness. This afternoon, 4 more alumni were added, and they were shocked.
It was a total surprise. I felt very honored, very privileged. I thought that was just very sweet.
I was very surprised by it. It's just incredibly moving and also humbling because to be in the category, together with the people that were honored with me today with their accomplishments, I'm just completely blown away.
Some of the speeches were emotional, while others took on a more serious note. But at the end of the day, all of the recipients wanted the students to go home with an important message.
I wanted them to value higher education, which with what you can do with education, it gives you the tools and the confidence to go out and solve difficult problems, whether that be in the medical field or in any other field. Education is of great value.
You can get an education at LCI and you can go out in the world and you can be competitive. And I compete in the most intensely competitive industry in the world. And I do just fine. And LCI was the bedrock of that.
Till Hess is a 10th grader at LCI and was honored to introduce his mom.
She's always been there for me. She's supported me like nobody else can, even if I didn't have a father figure there. She's always been there for me and has parented me in any way possible. And I'm super thankful for her. Ingrid, Darren, Mark, and Robin all graduated in the early 80s and today brought them back. For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
Stomping out the stigma of mental illness. That's the message behind the Sparta Stomp Run coming up this Saturday in Claresholm. It's the first year for this fundraiser. The run is being put on by Sparta House, which is a clubhouse drop-in center for adults suffering from mental health issues.
We have about 94 current members that come and go at any given time. We chose the name Sparta because we wanted to convey the strength of the people with a mental illness have. We were noticing that people generally would either fear somebody with a mental illness or they would have pity on them. Both are which things that we really don't want to see. We want people to understand how strong a person with a mental illness really is, living their best life, with the same society expectations as everybody else, but they're doing it with an internal battle of their own brain.
The 5K run takes place this Saturday and begins 10 a.m. outside of the Sparta House in Claresholm. More information can be found on our website, bridgecitynews.ca. Medicine Hat Council members voted unanimously this week to boycott a national conference in Quebec. Officials in the Hat say the move is pitted against Quebec politicians who have scorned Alberta's appeals for help in getting more oil to market. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities Conference is set to begin May 30th in Quebec's capital. While Medicine Hat has opted out, other Alberta municipalities, including Calgary, plan to join forces to try and win over federal allies at the conference. The Alberta Court of Appeal reserved its decision to overturn the conviction of a Calgary man in connection with the murder of a couple and a child. Douglas Garland's lawyer says evidence was found at his client's farm that should not have been allowed at his first-degree murder trial. Alias Sanders says police did not have enough evidence to obtain a search warrant when they were looking for Alvin and Kathy Lickness, along with 5-year-old Nathan O'Brien. Sanders argued that the constitutional rights of Garland were violated after he was arrested and his property was searched. A mortgage broker in Calgary who was busted in a phony multi-million-dollar bridge financing scheme lost an appeal of his fraud convictions. Brandon Ananonis attempted to overturn his 23 fraud and theft convictions, fell on deaf ears at the Alberta Court of Appeal. He is currently serving 4.5 years in prison. He argued the trial judge made errors and the guilty verdict was unreasonable. Recent reports say money laundering accounted for up to $5 billion last year in the BC real estate market. Nationwide, money laundering accounted for up to $47 billion last year across the country.
The amount of money being laundered in BC is more than anyone predicted. Conservatively, $7.4 billion was laundered in our province in last year alone. It's estimated that $5 billion was laundered through real estate transactions. The panel estimates that money laundering is responsible for increasing BC real estate prices by about 5%. And the report that we're releasing today shows just how important those measures are. So now BC will be leading the country in our efforts. We know that money laundering in our housing market is not a victimless crime.
Persecuted Pakistani Christian Aja Bibi is now in Canada after asylum claim was accepted. Bibi joined her daughter at an undisclosed location. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was at a dinner praising Canada's Pakistani community during Ramadan. He denounced all forms of Islamophobia and says political leaders must call it out when they see it.
And no matter where we are, the Muslim community welcomes everyone to be part of this holy time. Because Ramadan is about the values we all hold dear as Canadians, like compassion, peace, and serving others. The generosity of Muslim Canadians, whether it's building food baskets with Project Ramadan or the work of local mosques to help those in need, shapes our country for the better every day.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's armchair discussion at an event in Toronto was interrupted by a Grassy Narrows protester yesterday. The Grassy Narrows First Nation has been in the news quite a bit lately because of mercury poisoning on the reserve.
So I hope that you get it and listen to the community.
You can stay. It's okay. You please stay.
Thank you. Thank you. But you are welcome to stay if you like, please. You are among friends here, but I understand how difficult the situation is for you, for people in Grassy Narrows. It has been something, thank you, something that has gone on for far too long. We were talking recently about the origins of this issue. It is a joint responsibility between the federal government and the provincial government. We are working with them. Our Minister of Indigenous Services has met with the chief in Grassy Narrows. We are working towards solving this challenge, but I agree. We all are impatient to move forward in a way that gives healing to that community.
Even though the Crown has dropped all charges against Vice Admiral Mark Norman in connection with a $700 million shipbuilding contract controversy, the federal opposition parties are calling for an investigation into the Norman case.
And over the last year and a half, the Prime Minister's office unwillingness to give documents to the Norman defense team that they needed. That's political interference from beginning to end. I thank the Director of Public Prosecutions for making the right decision yesterday, but the PM denied them the ability to make that decision earlier by withholding documents, by counseling witnesses. We should be very, very concerned by the use of code words. It was revealed so that Mark Norman's name wasn't used in emails and documents. All of these things are a pattern of interference of the highest order, but the decision on whether to halt the case, stay the charges, we've never suggested that was political interference. But the fact that it took so long, it took Mark Norman mortgaging his house, stems from the delays and interference.
Our parliamentary reporter, Ray Fillion, says the Mark Norman story won't be going away anytime soon.
There won't be a trial, but the story is not necessarily over because we still don't know everything that happened behind closed doors within government. In the corridors of this case, there are allegations, for example, of political meddling, that the government tried to derail the trial by not releasing all the information, some of the documents that they had, because perhaps they contained some politically embarrassing information. And Mr. Norman made it clear that he's got a story to tell.
Catch the full interview with Ray Fillion discussing the biggest stories from the Hill coming up in the second half of our show. The Norman case is not the only controversy which has dogged the federal Liberal Party. There was also the SNC-Lavalin affair, which made headlines for a number of months. Miracle Channel CEO Leon Fontaine has some input as to how Christians should view these kinds of controversies.
I can't recall a time in the last decade where there's been this particular kind of upset in national politics. It's very important that we as citizens take notice and respond appropriately. Whether you're a believer or not, no one likes the idea of their elected government bullying others into bending the law, or worse, implying that life will be difficult for those who don't comply with their wishes. The Bible says whatever is done in secret will eventually come to light. We need to live our lives with that in mind. Although it is in fact biblical, it's just common sense. So how should we look at the events of the last 2 months and everything that has come out about the SNC-Lavalin affair? Well, the Bible says we need to judge. This is an area that most Christians totally misunderstand and misuse. We are to discern actions and judge a tree by its fruit, the Bible says. In other words, a person's track record. We should be asking what happened, but it's not up to us to judge the heart of the leaders. We don't need to. We can stay out of the name-calling and the immature judgments people often make in political disagreements. We don't need to demonize a leader to recognize decisions that are unwise. If we say nothing, we are condoning what the government has done. If we speak up, we should do so with common sense and dignity, yet with a passion that can never be quenched. I want to urge you to gain knowledge, do your research, and then vote accordingly. We should judge the track record and fruits of all those running for Prime Minister, and we should take action. We should write to our MPs and tell them how the SNC-Lavalin affair and the corresponding actions after its reveal have affected our view of the party in power, and how disappointed we are at any wrongdoing. They need to hear from us. We are the people they represent. Let those in law enforcement do their jobs. Let those in positions of influence do their jobs. And you and I should pray, act, and vote. Pray for those in power to lead this country with integrity and wisdom. Act by contacting your local MP and sharing your opinion. And vote. If you truly value living in a democracy and having wise leaders in all positions of power, then you should never take the freedom to vote for granted.
Great new films are at the Mill this weekend. Should be a great time to take the family out to enjoy some family fun entertainment. Here is the owner of the Mill now, Mr. Len Binning, with another Movie Mill Minute.
Family Animation returns with How to Train Your Dragon, The Hidden World. The dragon community is perfect until a new darkness arises, and now Astrid and Hiccup need to save the world by searching for a hidden one.
Wow. It's a hidden dragon world. Toothless, go introduce yourself.
Next up is a faith-based film named Breakthrough, the inspirational true story of a mother whose adopted son falls through the ice and is pronounced dead, but she does not give up hope, and her prayers are answered.
No. Please, God, send your Holy Spirit to save my son.
This year's our 25th anniversary, and we invite you all to come down and see what our theater has to offer. We love being locally owned and locally operated, and we love our community.
Looks like some incredible movies at the Mill once again. An overcast day, but good news, more sunshine is on tap for the weekend. Complete weather details are on deck. A mainly overcast day today. Tonight, a slight chance of showers with a low near 2 degrees. Tomorrow, mainly sunny with a high near 23. Even warmer on Mother's Day Sunday with a high expected near 24 degrees. A low pressure system returns on Monday, bringing clouds, rain, and a high of 21. Tuesday, a mixture of sun and cloud and a high near 20. Wednesday, cooling off slightly to 19 degrees. Thursday, mostly cloudy with a high near 20. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 17 and an average low of 3. The highest temperature in the state was recorded in 1940 at 31 degrees. And the record low was -9 in 1946. Sunrise was at 5:54, sunset at 9:01. Let's see how tomorrow's shaping up across the country now. Victoria will be mainly sunny with a high near 20, lots of sunshine at 22 for Vancouver. Sunny and 23 degrees for Calgary. Lots of sun as well and 22 for Edmonton tomorrow. Mainly cloudy and 14 for Regina. Overcast and 16 for Saskatoon. A good chance of thunder showers and 15 for Winnipeg tomorrow. Mainly sunny and 14 for Toronto. Partly cloudy and 15 degrees for Ottawa. Montreal had a rainfall warning today. Tomorrow mainly cloudy and a high of 14. Over the Maritimes, a chance of showers and 14 as well for Fredericton, New Brunswick. Halifax, Nova Scotia will be rainy and 15. Charlottetown, PEI will also receive showers and should get up to 13. St. John's, Newfoundland will have periods of drizzle and a high near 5 degrees on Saturday. An oil sands producer says fears of another oil price crisis are receding. Tim McKay from Canadian Natural Resources says it's because of the former NDP government which cut oil production. McKay says, however, steep price discounts will not disappear until new pipelines are built. The CEO of Cenovus Energy said higher prices from production curtailments have helped to boost royalties to Alberta's treasury by billions of dollars. But the production cuts are opposed by rivals such as Suncor and Husky Energy as a band-aid solution that does not address the real problem of insufficient pipeline capacity. Many people in BC are concerned about gas prices, and last report had gas in Vancouver at $1.75 a litre. David Yeager is an energy policy analyst, and he says the biggest reason is not actually because of a lack of pipelines, but it has more to do with the amount of taxes.
So why are prices so high? Well, as I said, there's 52 cents a litre in taxes alone. So you could offset any supply shortage just simply by rolling back taxes. The suggestion has been made, now that the pipeline is owned by the federal government, that it not be allowed to ship any dilbit or diluted bitumen at all, that it's carried nothing but gasoline and refined product. But of course, there is a small 50,000 barrel a day refinery in Burnaby that does require some oil. So it is, again, to the outsider looking in, this is pretty confusing.
Watch the full interview with Mr. Yeager as he discusses issues in our energy industry and if he thinks more pipelines will be built. That's coming up after business news. The World Bank has accused Montreal-based transportation giant Bombardier of corruption. The allegations stem from contracts Bombardier tried to win in Azerbaijan. The World Bank audit says there was also collusion involved, and then the company tried to obstruct investigation of the 2013 deal worth $339 million. Bombardier was to install rail signaling equipment in Azerbaijan, which is located between Russia and Iran. The deal was to be 85% financed by the World Bank. If Bombardier is found guilty, they could be blacklisted from future projects. Trade talks between the United States and China continued in Washington today. The negotiations move forward despite new tariffs the U.S. imposed on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods. Beijing said it would retaliate. Negotiators are trying to end the standoff, which has rattled stock markets around the world. Earlier this week, U.S. trade officials said the Chinese reneged on commitments they made earlier, which threw the trade talks into disarray. A Chinese ministry spokesperson says Beijing is hoping the Trump administration will meet China halfway in their dispute. Now, here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, hundreds of thousands of people marched in the 22nd annual March for Life, which took place in Ottawa. Other marches also went ahead in Edmonton, Regina, and Toronto. The theme for many pro-life marches this year across North America was unique from day one, pro-life is pro-science. Many Liberal MPs have decided not to seek re-election. We shall find out why when we chat with our parliamentary reporter, Ray Fillion, next. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Come for a fun time to Mama-Palooza, a free community Mother's Day event for kids and their families taking place Saturday, May 11th from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. at the Interfaith Food Bank. Activities include crafts, games, a candy station, bouncy castles, and so much more. Plus, pick a gift for Mom. Participants are encouraged to bring along a non-perishable food donation or financial gifts. Proceeds from this event will go to support Bikers Building Bridges, Superhero Ride for Kelly, and the Interfaith Food Bank. Monarch Day is taking place May 11th at the Monarch Community Hall from 8 to 11 a.m. Enjoy a delicious pancake breakfast, a bake sale, plus find new treasures throughout Monarch, with community garage sales being held throughout the day. For details, call 403-360-0811. Lethbridge Bike Fest is a full month of exciting and informative events encouraging you to get out and ride. Taking place Friday, May 17th from 2 to 4 p.m. is the Bike Mechanic Workshop at the Crossings Branch Public Library in West Lethbridge. Have the helpful technicians from Ascent Cycle get your bike into tip-top riding shape for summer. For more information about this and other Bike Fest events, visit yqlbikefest.ca. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
The federal election is scheduled to take place on October 21st. The latest polls show the federal Conservatives have a healthy lead over Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party. And we've also heard of many Liberals who appear to be jumping ship. To talk more about this and other big issues from the Hill is our national parliamentary reporter, Ray Fillion. Ray, the list of Liberal MPs not seeking re-election is growing, including West Vancouver MP Pamela Goldsmith-Jones. She says she wants to spend more time with her family. I mean, we've heard that before. But my favorite was Cape Breton Liberal MP Roger Cuzner, who said he's not running again because he's tired and cranky. You know, at least he's being honest, right?
Yeah, and that's quite surprising coming from Roger Cuzner because he's anything but cranky. I mean, what a funny guy. We're sure going to miss him here on Parliament Hill. You're right, Pamela Goldsmith-Jones, a first-term MP from British Columbia, was the latest to make the announcement earlier today that she's not going to be seeking re-election this fall. That puts to at least 24 current Liberal MPs who are not going to be seeking re-election in the October vote. More if you include some of the former Liberal MPs who now sit as independent. We know, of course, that Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott, they won't be back as Liberal MPs anytime soon. They're not going to be running as Liberals in the next election campaign. So that brings the number actually of Liberals not running as Liberals in the next election closer to 20. But it's actually not that many because according to data from the Library of Parliament, historically here in Ottawa, majority governments have historically seen an average of 22% of their members of Parliament not seeking re-election, decide not to run. And when you look at the other parties, the NDP is going to be losing roughly a third of their caucus. They're losing some big names, including Nathan Cullen from British Columbia. Many thought that he was going to be running. He was going to end up as leader of that party. And at least 11 of the 97 Conservative MPs have already said that they won't be seeking re-election in October. So not too bad. Sounds like a lot of Liberal MPs are not going to be running, but it actually represents less than 10% of their caucus.
A big story many of us covered this week was how the Crown decided to abruptly drop the case against the military's former second-in-command, Vice Admiral Mark Norman, a man who was accused of leaking cabinet secrets in relation to a $700 million shipbuilding deal, Ray.
Yeah, absolutely. Big story in federal politics this week, which took a lot of people by surprise, quite frankly, with the Crown prosecutor announcing in court on Wednesday morning that they had some new information leading them to believe that reaching a guilty verdict in this case was almost impossible. So a huge win for Vice Admiral Mark Norman and a big sigh of relief, quite frankly, for the Prime Minister, because the trial was supposed to start in August, just as Canadians were getting ready to go to the polls. You know, the campaign's expected to start right after Labor Day weekend. So chances are that trial would have been politically explosive, with some key members of the Trudeau Liberals being called to testify, including Gerald Butts, Mr. Trudeau's former right-hand man, his former Treasury Board President, Scott Bryson, who was involved in some of the talks behind closed doors that were leaked in November of 2015. But the thing is, I mean, there won't be a trial, but the story is not necessarily over because we still don't know everything that happened behind closed doors within government. In the corridors of this case, there are allegations, for example, of political meddling, that the government tried to derail the trial by not releasing all the information, some of the documents that they had, because perhaps they contained some politically embarrassing information. And Mr. Norman made it clear that he's got a story to tell. He wants to put that story out there. We don't know when that's going to happen. He made it sound like he wants to grant an interview to some media outlet to put the truth out there in the coming days. But the problem for that is that he's a high-ranking military officer. He's going back to his old job. So I'm not sure the Canadian Forces are going to let him speak his mind as long as he works for the Canadian Forces, but that remains to be seen. We don't know the whole details of that story. That may still come out, which could prove, depending on what's said, obviously, to be a problem for Justin Trudeau.
Great. Maybe we should have this big media conference with Mark Norman on one side, Jody Wilson-Raybould on the other side, have all the media there, and they can finally tell both of their stories.
Some people here on Parliament Hill believe that this story could actually end up being bigger than the SNC-Lavalin controversy. So it's not over. Opposition parties and the media will keep digging, that's for sure.
Ray, Conservative leader Andrew Scheer is starting to unveil his campaign platform. Let's talk a bit about that.
Well, yeah, he earlier this week, he gave the first of 5 major speeches that he's going to give across Canada between now and the end of the parliamentary session in mid-June. These are events in which Mr. Scheer is obviously trying to look like a prime minister, and he's also putting some stuff in the window for Canadian voters to see ahead of the campaign. The first of those 5 speeches was given earlier this week in Montreal. He talked about some of his positions on foreign affairs. He said, for example, that a conservative government led by him would join the U.S. missile shield. It would also take, he says, a former stand on China, with whom Canada is having trouble right now. He also said that a Scheer government would recognize Jerusalem as the capital, and so he would actually align that position with that of Donald Trump, the American president. Now, as I said, this was only this week the first of 5 major speeches that he's going to be giving in the weeks ahead. Future topics include immigration, the economy, the Canadian Federation, and also the environment, which is a much awaited speech by Andrew Scheer. He says he's going to be making that speech sometime in June in the province of Quebec. A lot of people are waiting to see what his plan for the environment is going to be. Not a day goes by here in the nation's capital without the Liberals, getting on Mr. Scheer's case. Where's your plan to curb greenhouse gas emissions? He said that he was going to make that plan public more than a year ago. A lot of people are impatient to see what it's about.
Now, with the election just around the corner, we should expect to see some more pre-election goodies. The feds are now upping some of the payments to parents through the Canada Child Benefit. Tell me more about that.
That's right. The Canada Child Benefit is now tied to inflation. Inflation went up in the last year 2.2% in our country. So payments to parents will also go up 2.2%, just in time for the election as of July 20th. So for a child under the age of 6, the maximum payment will go up $143 to $6,600 a year. And for a child aged between 6 and 11, the increase will be $121, bringing the maximum total to $5,600 a year. This is something that the Liberals are planning to talk about at length between now and voting day on October 21st. This is an initiative that's been very popular with parents. They're getting tax-free money from the federal government. And according to StatsCan, many kids across Canada have been lifted out of poverty in part because of the Canada Child Benefit.
Diplomatic tensions continue between Canada and China. China has banned our canola and pork. Now Ottawa is asking for the United States to speak to China on our behalf. Kind of like Big Brother. Can you give us a hand here?
Yeah, exactly. That's what it is, because things have only gotten worse ever since Canada arrested Meng Wanzhou, the Huawei executive in Vancouver, in early December. Since then, 2 Canadian men have been put on death row in China. 2 more have been detained since December. Now, Canada would like the U.S. to step in and talk to Chinese officials on behalf of Ottawa, because let's remember, Meng Wanzhou, the Huawei executive, was arrested at the request of the Americans. So they're trying to get some help from their friends. That's exactly what it is. Maybe give the Chinese another point of view, a new voice, a new way of explaining to them that Canada's judicial system is completely independent from the political. Of course, the Americans are in the midst of a trade war right now with China, but Canada's counting on its closest ally to perhaps lower the temperature a bit. They need every help they can get right now.
Speaking of the United States, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says Canada's claim to the Northwest Passage is illegitimate.
Yeah, that's what he said this week in Finland. He was giving a speech to the Arctic Council, and Canadian experts have called his speech provocative and inaccurate. The U.S. has a long has a long contested feud with Canada over sovereign claims through the Northwest Passage. Russia also has a claim, as you might know. The Canadian government responded to Mr. Pompeo's speech this week by pointing to an agreement that was reached many, many years ago by former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney with his American counterpart at the time, President Reagan, which is an agreement that allows the U.S. to designate the Northwest Passage as an international waterway while allowing Canada to say that it's part of Canadian sovereign territory. But it looks like the Americans want to deviate from that. They don't want to recognize Canada's claim. So, yeah, another bone of contention between Ottawa and Washington, while Canada is asking for help from the United States with their spat with China. So.
Ray, a new report by the Auditor General says Canadians wait way too long when they phone a federal government call center. I think we can all kind of relate to that.
Yeah, we can certainly relate to that. Millions of calls go unanswered each year, the federal government level. This is what the Auditor General investigated. He looked at the numbers from three departments, the Immigration Department, Employment and Social Development Canada, and Veterans Affairs, and he found that the worst wait times are in the Immigration Department, 30 minutes or more. A lot of people simply give up, they hang up. And the bad news is for people who prefer the phone, people like me who prefer using the phone over the internet, the bad news is that the situation is unlikely to improve anytime soon, even though even though a lot of Canadians prefer using the phone, the government's strategy to modernize client services doesn't include call centers. They're putting all the focus right now on online services. So bad news for people like me.
Now, the Auditor General also says the feds are failing to collect millions of dollars in taxes on foreign digital products.
Yeah, he says that Canada's laws, Hal, haven't adapted to changing times, the fact that more and more Canadians shop online as opposed to in stores. And the situation is this. When you're a Canadian company, you offer an online service like a movie streaming service. That service is taxed. The GST applies to that service, but it doesn't apply if you're a foreign company like Airbnb or Netflix. So that's a nonsense, according to the Auditor General's office. He says that Canadian companies are at a major disadvantage. Some companies might want to leave Canada to offer their services to Canadians from abroad. And, it just doesn't make sense. The government's response is to say there is a major international study being conducted at the moment by the G20 and also by the OECD. Their report is expected sometime between now and next year, and the government says things will likely change based on their recommendations, but it doesn't look like anything is going to change between now and the next election.
Conservative MP Lisa Raitt recently blasted the Liberals about the amount of asylum seekers. Ray, our immigration system is apparently overwhelmed by the huge influx of immigrants.
A whopping 71,000 refugee claims have yet to be studied by federal officials. This is unprecedented, and it's all thanks, obviously, to the influx of refugees that we've seen at the Canada-U.S. border, many of them coming into Canada from the United States at Roxham Road in Quebec. The Auditor General is saying in his report this week that the Canadian immigration system is not flexible enough. So big problem. Canada's response, the government responded saying the situation has changed since the auditor looked at the situation, but on the ground still a lot of people are waiting to be processed, and quite frankly, I don't know how long it's going to take to go through those 71,000 refugee claims.
Our parliamentary reporter, Ray Fillion, joining me once again from our nation's capital. Thanks so much, Ray.
You're welcome, Hal.
Alberta has a new government. Will the new energy policies actually change the fortunes of our hurting oil and gas sector? Today's guest may shed a little light on this. David Yeager is an energy policy analyst and author of the book called From Miracle to Menace, Alberta, A Carbon Story. David, welcome back to BCN.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Now, the opening line in your book is, the current debate about climate change and what mankind should really do about it has deteriorated to the point of absurdity. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, if you're on one side or the other of the climate change debate, it all sort of makes sense. But if you're just looking and wondering what's going on, you should be completely confused. They're trying to ban tankers on the West Coast with Bill 48. And yet on the St. Lawrence Seaway, that's how Quebec gets all its oil imported, is by tanker. I would classify the St. Lawrence Seaway as more fragile or more as equally economically sensitive or environmentally sensitive as the West Coast. We've got John Horgan trying to block the pipeline, who's now having an investigation in the Lower Mainland about the skyrocketing cost of gasoline, even though the province and the feds have got a combined 52 cents a liter in taxes on it. So if you look at all this disparate information, and of course Alberta is struggling, we can't get oil or more fluids, hydrocarbon fluids to the Lower Mainland, of course, because the government is simultaneously complaining about the price while blocking the pipe. And so again, if this isn't perplexing, I don't know what is. It's just bonkers.
Now, David, Alberta has a new government with Jason Kenney and the UCP. They have a change in energy policies. Do you think this is really good news for the oil and gas industry?
I think it is, in the sense that there's a great deal of the challenges facing the oil and gas industry that are completely within the purview of the government of Alberta. And of course, he's suggested he's going to roll back the increase in provincial sales tax. If you recall, even though oil prices were falling, one of the first things the Notley administration did 4 years ago was increase corporate taxes. He's going to roll them back, which is helpful. There is myriads and myriads and piles of regulations in Edmonton that have been written up over the last 20 years. We flunked the red tape index in Alberta. And of course, the cost of government is something like 20% higher per capita in Alberta than BC, with no materially better health care services, no materially lower classroom sizes, and so on. So the idea that you could go to Edmonton and look under the hood after decades, really, of runaway oil spending and perhaps see if it's not possible to do more with less or do the same thing with less money, that's a refreshing review. He's promised faster drilling licenses. He's going to look into the regulator, the Alberta Energy, and AER, the Alberta Energy Regulator. So he has quite a number of opportunities to make things better with or without new pipelines. So I think there's generally there's enthusiasm for this change of government in the oil and gas industry, no doubt.
Now, do you think we'll actually see the go-ahead for the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion, despite the fact that Jason Kenney is planning to repeal the carbon tax?
I've been asked that question many times, and I can say when they're digging ditches, when the backhoes are moving dirt, and protesters are arrested, I can say conclusively the Trans Mountain pipeline is under construction, and they're determined to finish it. I don't know. It's just not intuitive in a government that's positioned itself on the climate file and as an environmental leader, that going into the election where they're not going to, put it this way, the Liberals are unlikely to win too many seats in Alberta. Saskatchewan is conservative now, Manitoba's conservative, Ontario's conservative. BC was a stronghold for Liberal seats in the last election. Perhaps the gasoline shortage, the gasoline prices and the fuel in the Lower Mainland is a reason you can approve this pipeline and not cost you votes. I wish I could be more optimistic. I haven't answered your question, but I'll be thrilled if they do it. I'll put it that way. I'll be thrilled if he does it, but it's just not intuitive to me going into a federal election that this is the sort of policy that the current Prime Minister really wants to campaign on.
David, people are looking at $1.75 a litre right now in the Lower Mainland of British Columbia. How high could it potentially go?
Well, you think they'd be happy about that. That's the purpose of carbon taxes. That's the purpose of the fossil fuel investment divestment movement. The whole concept of cutting off the supply of oil sands was to have the price go up, not down. You would think this was progress, that, for example, Andrew Weaver, the leader of the Green Party, he picked his words. He regretted the words he chose, but just recently he was saying, well, why don't you go get a personal line of credit and buy an electric car? Holy cow. So I would, how high could it go? Well, if Premier Kenney does what he's very, very unlikely to do, which is shut off the flow of the Trans Mountain pipeline, I mean, the sky's the limit. But there's no question there is a shortage of product into that market. We've been trying to solve it for them for years and having to fight with them every step of the way.
What about Kenny's threat to implement Bill 12 that was actually put together by the NDP, the previous NDP government, and turn off the taps to British Columbia? How effective will this be in getting Premier John Horgan to say, hey, you know what, maybe we should have a pipeline go through BC?
Well, if they had an army, they'd probably send it in. Again, this is the big stick, and this is the tool that I think the Premier is unlikely to use. I believe they just had a commission into why gasoline prices are so high in the Lower Mainland. Just to give you an idea about the confusion that you referred to when we opened this chat. He's so why are prices so high? Well, as I said, there's 52 cents a liter in taxes alone. So you could offset any supply shortage just simply by rolling back taxes. The suggestion has been made now that the pipeline is owned by the federal government that it not be allowed to ship any dilbit or diluted bitumen at all, that it's carried nothing but gasoline and refined product. But of course, there is a small 50,000 barrel a day refinery in Burnaby that does require some oil. So it is, again, to the outsider looking in, this is pretty confusing. If you're trying to figure out what's going on, call me if you figure it out.
UCP leader Jason Kenney says he will cancel the NDP's almost $4 billion crude by rail lease contracts. Is that a good idea?
I'm a mixed on that one. The government of Alberta brought in the bitumen royalty in kind program back in 2007, and all the oil sands don't pay full royalties yet. So there's going to come a point, based on the current oil sands production, that the Crown could be receiving another 300,000 or 400,000 barrels a day in brick barrels, bitumen royalty in kind, which of course is their job to sell. And so I don't know the full details on this program. There's certainly mixed reviews in the industry. I'd sure hate to see those rail cars go. He may decide the government doesn't have to do it. I see there was a clip in the news today that CN Rail is happy to work with whoever. And so I do think that rail capacity will be required, unless there's a breakthrough on the pipe side that we don't know about. But remember that the Enbridge Line 3 expansion was supposed to carry oil later this year. It's been set back a full year. And so perhaps perhaps that cancel the rail was conceived when we thought we'd get that 370,000 barrels a day of pipe later this year with it set back a year. What's he going to do? I know you're going to find this hard to believe. He doesn't ask me. But I would say in the industry that most people think that keeping that capacity in one form or another is not a bad idea, since the commitments have been made. It's just whether or not the government has to own it. Perhaps there's a compromise somewhere in there.
Bill C-69 is awaiting all kinds of amendments. The Liberals would like to see it pass before the next federal election in October. Kenney calls it the No Pipelines Bill. Is this bill fixable, or is it inevitable that it would seriously hurt the oil and gas industry?
There's something like 100 different proposed amendments, and both the proponents of the bill and the opponents of the bill are proposing different batches of amendments. They're certainly going to try. It'll be interesting to see what flies, what comes forth on the amendment file, that if the Senate can agree on what amendments, and of course it'll be interesting to see what the government does about it before it shuts down for the summer sometime in June. Obviously, the good news about the hearings and everything about Bill C-69 is it has gotten enough further analysis by the Senate hearings across the country that it is unlikely to be passed into law in its current form. That I think we can all say, we can agree with some comfort. The question is, are they going to water it down as much as they have to? Because what they've really done is in looking at it, they've really put an incredible amount of power. You got these hearings, you got these regulators, you got this consultation. Ultimately, it goes back to the cabinet and the federal minister to say whether they like it or not. And that is really an element of uncertainty that investors, they just don't want that. They would like to know.
David, what about Bill C-48, the tanker bill? We chatted a bit about that earlier. Is there any hope of changing that?
It's pretty well got to go. It's got to die, really. It has to go away. I laughed. I saw a clip the other day that this was the energy minister in the province of Saskatchewan going on the hearings on Bill 48. And they said that we import oil in the St. Lawrence by tanker all the way down. We talked about that earlier. And this may be the only petroleum producing country in the history of the world that is banning the export of its domestic oil by tanker. It's right out there. And so Bill 48 is really unsalvageable. It's pretty well got to go in the garbage can. Again, is that the sort of thing that we can see? I can see that one sort of dying on the order desk before Parliament shuts down prior to the election.
Now, what about Jason Kenney's claim that the Rockefellers and other political activists south of the border have landlocked Alberta's oil for decades? Any truth to that?
That's actually not Kenney's claim. He's picked up the work of West Coast researcher Vivian Krause, who has been exploring this subject for 10 years. But yeah, I found the same information when I did the book. And in 2008, there was a project out of the United States called the Tar Sands Campaign, heavily funded by the Rockefeller family and others. Its specific purpose was to block pipelines, put money to support anyone opposed to the pipelines, and landlock Alberta oil, to stop the development or growth of the oil sands for one of two reasons, either to save the world or to ensure that it only had one client, which was the United States. I'm not into the conspiracy theory side, but yes, there's no question that all the records indicate that these foundations have been putting money into the tar sands campaign for a decade. And I'd say if we tried to do that in Canada, if Canadians got caught interfering in U.S. politics at this level, I'm not sure they wouldn't send in the Marines and invade our country. And so, yeah, he's going to go down the path. And this is kind of interesting that a sovereign government is going to take on, even at the provincial level, is going to take on the environmental movement. That is a significant change from what's happened in the past.
So if Canada gets a new federal government this fall, Andrew Scheer becomes Prime Minister, how long would it take to rescind Bill C-69 and Bill C-48? And how long would it also take to regain investor confidence in our energy sector?
Well, again, it depends what shape C-69 is in at the time, whether it gets through the House or not. Again, my theory is Bill 48 isn't going to make it through the House, so you don't have to, or isn't going to make it through the Senate, so you don't have to rescind a bill if the new Parliament recalls it or asks the Senate not to approve it. Bill C-69 can be amended. You're going to have to convene the House. But the international investors are looking for a series of signals from Canada that we're going to return to being a reliable and predictable place to invest capital, because it's got a lot of it's got attractions, it's got the resource base, it's got the technology, it's got rule of law, laws we don't agree with, but you're not likely to be kidnapped if you work here. So it's got a number of advantages. So there's a bunch of boxes that need checking. One of them is the new Alberta government, so we checked that one. If we were to get a new federal government that clearly who had a purpose not to block the oil sands. I mean, Trudeau's on the record as doing this, blocking pipelines, blocking the oil sands. I mean, the whole program is pretty indicative that they're going to do what they can to hamper the growth of the fossil fuel industries in Canada. We're the only major oil producing country in the world. We're the 5th largest oil and gas producer in the world, by the way. We're the only one in the world that's self-immolating its economy. So a change in the federal government would be a significant signal to the international investment community that Canada has regained its senses and would like to get back into business. It would be fantastic.
David, one more question I want to ask you. I watched on a recent interview with Jason Kenney. He says, we're okay with giving transfer payments to Quebec, BC, other provinces across the country, but we need to make money to be able to afford those transfer payments. So why wouldn't you think the feds would stand up and say, yeah, you know what? You're right, Alberta. We need some of those pipelines through Quebec and BC so you guys can get the money.
That goes back to the opening line of my book and the opening line of this interview, that the climate debate in Canada and in the world has deteriorated to the point of absurdity. Yes, Alberta will take your money. Yeah, this is Quebec. We'll take your money. We like the transfer payments. We like the oil tankers carrying oil down the St. Lawrence River, the one we dump raw sewage into from Montreal. And we do want your dirty oil coming through our pristine province. It is very, very difficult to comprehend. But that's modern politics. John Horgan, before he became premier in BC, was a Labour guy, and he was not opposed to the pipelines. He was just, this is his current tribe that got him into power, doesn't like oil sands, doesn't like pipelines, so he's opposed. And I think Francois Legault is probably a pretty level-headed guy, but the people that voted him into office don't want pipe, and life's simpler if he, I mean, what could be more important than him maintaining his own popularity?
Sometimes common sense just isn't that common anymore. Energy policy analyst and author of the new book, From Miracle to Menace, Alberta, A Carbon Story. Thanks again for joining me on BCN.
Much appreciated. Thanks for your time. Have a great day.
You too. On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and have a great night.